I know that my colleague from North Dakota has given great thought about this, has great understanding about the issue, and also great passion about how we ensure that from a national security perspective, we're covered in all corners. So I would ask my colleague from North Dakota, as she has reviewed, again, an antiquated and an outdated policy, how, from a producing state like North Dakota, where you are working to advance the opportunities not only for North Dakotans, but for people all over this country, how people in North Dakota feel when it's suggested that we are imposing effectively domestic sanctions on them, while at the same time we would relieve sanctions on Iran.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
I want to thank my good friend from Alaska for giving me an opportunity to talk about this policy of sanctions that is wrong, wrong, wrong on so many levels. When we first look at it, we need to understand that the embargo or the limitations on exportation of crude oil in this country is a policy decision made by the president initially, President Nixon, in response to a number of producers going around oil price support controls. So this is a 1970s policy. Unfortunately, when we transitioned away from price supports for crude oil, we never removed this embargo. We never removed this restriction. That was a mistake at this time, and it continues to be a colossal mistake for our growth towards energy independence in this country and our ability to use our energy and our oil for soft power, to actually provide a consistent and ready supply of crude oil to our allies, so they are not beholden, not only to Iran, but not beholden to companies like, or countries like Russia. And so it is critically important that we examine some of the concerns, I think, that people have about lifting the embargo. Obviously, North Dakota, we don't see any logic, because we're kind of a common sense state. We don't see any logic behind not allowing crude oil to be exported, but allowing every refined product that we could produce in this country access to a foreign market. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. If the logic behind this is to try and maintain stability and a lower gasoline price, then we should lock down gasoline. We shouldn't export gasoline. I mean, the antiquated policy that we're talking about today didn't have a lot of logic after we deregulated oil. It has even less logic in the dangerous world that we live in. We know that so many of our foreign enemies rely on oil revenue to basically fund their terrorism activity, to basically fund their government, to supply the necessary government services that keep them in power. And we have an opportunity to say to our allies, whether it's Japan or in Europe, don't worry about whether somebody is going to hold you hostage because you won't be able to heat your homes in the winter or provide gasoline to your communities and your consumers. Don't worry about that, because we've got your back. But we can't have their back if we don't have the ability to export our crude oil. And the bottom line is that on every level, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of what we should be in this country, at every level, a policy of maintaining an embargo, a restriction against exports of crude oil, makes no common sense. Absolutely none. But let's talk about domestic policy, because I think some of the concerns that have been expressed to me by my colleagues, and I'm sure Senator Murkowski's colleagues, have been, well, won't this increase gasoline prices? And I have to applaud Senator Murkowski, because very early on she heard that and she said, let's have some real intellectual work done. Just don't rely on my, economics 101. How about we actually get economists from Brookings, economists from the Aspen Institute, economists all over the country who have come to one single conclusion, which is that it will not raise gasoline prices. In fact, the conclusion is quite the opposite, that allowing us access to an international market could, in fact, reduce gasoline prices. Why would that be, you wonder? Because I think the fluke of how we refine crude oil in this country, most of our refineries are based on heavy sour crude. The crude we produce in North Dakota is light sweet crude. We don't have a big refining capacity for light sweet crude, so we have a price reduction in our country. So how is gasoline prices, how are they established? They're based on that higher crude oil price, because they're refining crude oils that come in from other places like Saudi Arabia. They're refining crude oils that come in from Venezuela, and they're charging an appropriate price. Some people would say there's a little bit of price creep here as we're looking at gasoline prices, and the ability to get our crude to market is absolutely critical. Now, there's a lot of people who also think that we should keep a captive market on a lot of our resources, and we've heard this argument in natural gas, and we heard this argument in crude oil. And they think we should have a captive market. And I have a constant reply. I say I have a lot of hog farmers who like low corn prices. The solution for low corn prices have never been to not export corn. This is the only commodity that is traded on a global price that doesn't have the ability to find its market. Now, what's the consequence of that? I would tell you, to my friend in Alaska, and I think she sees this, is that one of the things I sincerely believe is that the ability to produce oil, our domestic production of oil, had a lot to do with driving Iran to the negotiating table. They saw that we could, in fact, infiltrate the markets, take market share. That's threatening to a lot of the former OPEC countries who are wanting that captive market. And so we were able to maintain, if we had access to that market, we'd be sending a message. And so why don't we do the right thing here? Why don't we understand how this export ban on American crude oil is restricting our ability to use crude oil as an appropriate soft power opportunity? Why don't we talk about how actually allowing for the export of crude oil could drive down gasoline prices in the United States of America and continue the energy renaissance? Because if we can't find our market, if we can't find our market in North Dakota for this production, guess what happens? It either goes into storage or it gets shut in where it's at, which is in the field. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs will be lost, but more importantly, our energy security in this country will be jeopardized and harmed. This policy of opening up this restriction is so right on so many levels, and I applaud the senator from Alaska for bringing it forth in this context. I think it is critical to talk about it in this context. But I also applaud her for all the work that she's done and we've supported as she's built out the case, the economic case, for why this policy makes no sense at any level. And it's wrong-headed. It's time to change it. This is an opportunity we will not end, because it is only fair to every oil field worker out there. It is only fair to every owner of a royalty or minerals in place. It's fair to every operator, and it's fair to the people of this country to engage in trade, level the playing field, and make sure that we are telling our friends and allies that they don't have to buy their oil from countries that threaten their security every day. We've got a supply of oil that can readily be exported and provided to them. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I thank my good friend from Alaska for her continued advocacy on behalf of consumers in this country and her continued advocacy on behalf of an energy appropriate policy in the United States of America.
Well, I thank my colleague from North Dakota. You have articulated the case so well, not only from a domestic perspective, but truly the international as well. We need to appreciate that as we are recognized as a nation, as that superpower when it comes to our military strength and all that those who serve us have to offer, that we are also an energy superpower. And we have not yet embraced that as a responsibility, as an obligation to use that to not only our advantage, but the advantage of our friends and allies around the globe. And that's an important transition, a transformation that we need to make. We are mired down in policies that are decades old, based on history that is no longer relevant given the geopolitics of today, we have an opportunity to wake up to where we can be, how we can lead from an international perspective. And it can begin with the strength of our energy and our energy resources. But we have to believe in our own possibilities. Right now, I think we're lagging in that. So I appreciate all that my colleague is doing in this effort to help educate people. I recognize that it takes a little bit of time to recalibrate the thinking, but we are doing that, and we're doing it for the right reason, based on common sense, based on strength of the economy, and based on national security, which should be our primary consideration right now. We will never have sufficient boots on the ground budget for defense to be everywhere where many would like to be around the globe. What other assets do we have? What else can we contribute? It can begin with our energy resources. So we have great opportunities, and I look forward to further discussions about not only what we're proposing in this amendment, but how we can lead as a nation in the energy sector. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.